The first shriek of the pager cut through the blessed silence of my kitchen like a murder hornet with a megaphone. It's a sound you never get used to. It's not just loud, it's a violation. It's engineered to bypass every normal function of your brain and mainline pure, unadulterated adrenaline straight into your heart. My half-chopped onion fell from my hand, rolling sadly onto the floor as my phone joined the chorus, a digital scream backing up the analog one. Beep, 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 wah-oop, wah-oop. I snatched the phone. The screen glowed with the words that every firefighter dreads. All call. Structure fire. Confirmed entrapment. 1412 Maple Avenue. My blood went cold. Then, instantly hot. All call meant they were pulling in everyone, on duty or off. My station, the next town over, anyone who could get there. Confirmed entrapment meant someone was inside the inferno. And 1412 Maple Avenue. I could practically see it from my front door. It was 2 blocks away. The old Henderson place, a tinder-dry 2-story relic from the 50s built with balloon frame construction. A death trap. The half-renovated kitchen around me ceased to exist. The dream of a quiet evening, a new recipe, a cold beer, all of it evaporated. The civilian, Jack Riley, homeowner and amateur chef, was gone. In his place was firefighter Riley, a machine programmed with a single directive. Go. Now. My movements were a blur of practiced efficiency. Stove off, keys, wallet, phone, slap pockets to confirm. I didn't bother with shoes. My beat-up work boots were already by the door. I was out of the house in under 30 seconds, the screen door slamming shut behind me as I sprinted toward my old, reliable, slightly rusty Ford F-150, my sanctuary, my escape pod. And then I saw it. I stopped dead in the middle of my own driveway, my brain short-circuiting for a solid 2 seconds. It was like seeing a shark in a swimming pool. The object was so out of place, so profoundly, impossibly wrong, that my mind refused to process it. Parked perfectly, symmetrically, across the entire width of my driveway apron was a gleaming, sterile, offensively white Lexus RX 350. It wasn't just blocking me in. It was a statement, a declaration of war written in polished chrome and passive aggression. Carol Peterson's car. A special kind of rage, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline. There were at least a dozen empty parking spots on our quiet cul-de-sac. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. I looked toward her house, 3 doors down. A single lamp cast a smug, golden glow from her living room window. She was home. "You have got to be kidding me," I breathed, the words swallowed by the night. No time. I sprinted across my lawn, its grass a 1/4 inch too long according to her last letter, and hammered on her front door. Not a polite knock. I was trying to knock it off its hinges. "Carol!" I yelled, my voice raw. "Move your car, now!" The porch light flicked on. The door opened a few inches, held by a brass security chain. Her face, framed by perfectly coiffed blonde hair, appeared in the gap. She was wearing a silk pajama set that probably cost more than my first car. Her expression wasn't one of alarm, but of regal annoyance, like I was a peasant complaining about the plague. "Mr. Riley," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What is the meaning of this racket? It is after 9 o'clock. "There's a house on fire down the street," I bit out, pointing vaguely toward Maple Avenue. The first faint sirens were starting to wail in the distance. "I'm a first responder, Carol. I'm on my way to the call. You are blocking my driveway." Her eyes, small and hard, narrowed. I saw a flicker of something in them. It wasn't confusion or concern. It was a spark of opportunity. She had me, and she knew it. "I don't see what that has to do with me," she said, the lie forming on her lips with practiced ease. "The board, which, as you know, is me, has discussed the issue of parking. I am parked here temporarily. Besides, she added, her voice taking on a whiny, lecturing tone, a fire is no excuse for incivility. Your tone is completely unacceptable. The sheer, unmitigated absurdity of her statement nearly made me laugh. It was the laugh of a man teetering on the edge of sanity. "People could be dying, you ridiculous woman!" I roared, my last shred of composure snapping. "Move your damn car!" That was a mistake. Her face hardened into a mask of righteous indignation. "Don't you dare speak to me that way. I am the president of this homeowners association. I will be reporting this verbal assault and harassment first thing in the morning. I am certainly not moving my vehicle until you learn to speak to me with the respect my position demands." Slam. The door clicked shut in my face. The chain rattled into place. I stood there on her perfectly manicured porch, trembling. I was vibrating with a level of white-hot fury I hadn't felt since I was a dumb rookie getting chewed out for a mistake that could have gotten someone killed. But this was different. This wasn't professional. This was personal. This was war. Arguing was useless. Calling the cops would take too long. My truck was trapped, but my legs still worked. As I took off, sprinting down the asphalt street in my heavy boots, my mind was already churning. A plan began to form. A terrible, beautiful, righteous plan. It was petty, it was unprofessional, and it was going to be the most satisfying moment of my adult life. "Okay, Riley," I thought, my lungs burning as I ran toward the growing glow in the night sky. "You can't fix stupid, but you can make it pay. First, go save some lives. Then, let's go solve a parking problem, professionally." Running through the dark, the distant sirens getting closer, my mind flashed back to the day I closed on the house. I had stood in the empty living room, the air thick with the smell of dust and neglect, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. It was a wreck, sure. Water stains on the ceiling, peeling paint, a kitchen straight out of a Cold War bunker. But it had good bones. It was mine. After years of living in cramped apartments where the sound of my neighbors' arguments was the soundtrack to my life, this house was my sanctuary, my project, my kingdom of one. My first interaction with Carol had been 2 days after I moved in. I was wrestling a stained, hideous floral couch out the front door when her white Lexus glided to a stop. She got out, holding a welcome basket that seemed to be actively mocking me with its wicker cheerfulness. "You must be the new owner," she'd said, her eyes not on me, but on my beat-up F-150. "I'm Carol Peterson. I'm the HOA president." She said president like it was a royal title. "Jack Riley," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Nice to meet you." "Welcome to Oakwood Preserve," she continued, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We have a rule about commercial vehicles being parked on the street, Mr. Riley, even if they're personal." I looked at my truck. It was old, a little dented, but it was my baby. It had hauled lumber, tools, and the occasional piece of fire equipment. "It's not commercial," I'd said, my good mood starting to curdle. "It's just old, like that attitude." Her smile vanished. The welcome basket was placed on the ground, not handed to me. It was a transaction, a warning. From that day on, the love letters started arriving, crisp, cream-colored envelopes containing photographic evidence of my sins. A single, empty mulch bag leaning against the garage, waiting for trash day. $50 fine. Grass measured at 3.25 inches when the covenant limit was a strict 3 inches. $50 fine. Visible trash receptacles taken out the night before pickup, $75 fine. Each one was a paper cut, a small, irritating sting designed to remind me who was in charge. This, though, blocking me in during an emergency call. This wasn't a paper cut. This was a stab wound. She hadn't just crossed a line, she'd nuked it from orbit. I arrived at the scene on Maple Avenue, panting and sweating, the smell of smoke thick in the air. The Henderson house was engulfed. Flames licked out of the second-story windows, painting the night sky in hellish shades of orange and red. I found my captain, Dave Miller, a man whose face was a permanent road map of cynicism and exhaustion. "Riley, what the hell are you doing on foot?" he yelled over the roar of the pumper truck. "Long story, Cap. What do you need?" The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. I helped the crew from Engine 4 pull a secondary hose line to protect the neighboring house. I was on the team that forced the back door, shouting into the smoke-filled interior. The primary search team found Mr. Henderson passed out in a first-floor bathroom from smoke inhalation. Maria, our company's star paramedic, had him on oxygen and on a gurney before the fire was even knocked down. It was a good stop, a great one. Everyone was out, and the house, while a mess, was still standing. As the adrenaline began to recede, replaced by the bone-deep weariness that always followed a big fire, my rage returned, simmering just below the surface. We were packing up hoses, the air now smelling of wet, charred wood, when I saw my opportunity. I walked over to Dave, who was leaning against the side of Quint 7, our pride and joy. "Hey, Cap," I said, trying to sound casual. "Got a weird favor to ask on the way back to the station?" Dave took a long swig from his water bottle. "After that stop, you can ask me for my kidney. What's up?" "Got a public nuisance situation back at my place," I said carefully. "A vehicle is illegally parked, blocking emergency access to a private residence. The owner is, refusing to cooperate." Maria, who was coiling a rope nearby, overheard. Her eyes lit up with understanding. "Don't tell me," she said, a grin spreading across her face. "The HOA witch with the white Lexus?" I nodded grimly. "The very same. Blocked my entire driveway. I had to run here." Dave's tired eyes focused on me. He processed the information for a moment. Then a slow, magnificent grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a man who had spent 30 years dealing with every flavor of human stupidity and was about to witness a new, spectacular chapter. "Riley, you are a menace to polite society," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "I love it." He turned to the Quint's driver. "Hey, Mike, we're making a quick stop on the way back. A little community outreach." 2 minutes later, Quint 7 turned onto my quiet, sleepy suburban street. It's hard to describe the sheer presence of a 47-ton, 60-foot-long ladder truck in a place designed for minivans and Priuses. It didn't just drive down the road, it consumed it. The rumble of its massive diesel engine vibrated through the pavement, a low growl that promised official, earth-shaking business. Its lights weren't flashing, but the polished chrome, the gleaming red paint, and its colossal size were more intimidating than any siren. It was a shark in the swimming pool, a beautiful, righteous red and chrome shark. Lights flicked on in the houses around my cul-de-sac. Curtains twitched, faces appeared in windows, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. Mike, our driver, expertly maneuvered the behemoth, stopping it directly behind Carol's pristine Lexus. The truck's massive grille, a silver wall of intimidation, filled her entire rear-view mirror, dwarfing the luxury SUV. Then came the sound that sealed the deal. Psh! The air brakes, loud, definitive, and utterly final. It was the sound of consequences arriving. I hopped down from the passenger seat, my heavy turnout gear still on, smelling faintly of smoke and victory. I walked calmly, deliberately, across my lawn and up to Carol's front door. I knocked again, but this time it was a polite, formal rap. The door flew open. Carol stood there, her face contorted in a mask of fury, a pre-written tirade ready on her lips. "I told you I would be report—" Her words died in her throat. Her eyes went past me, to the mechanical leviathan now occupying the street in front of her house. Her jaw went slack. The color drained from her face, leaving her with a pasty, horrified complexion that clashed with her expensive pajamas. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside, gesturing to Captain Miller, who was now leaning out the passenger window of the Quint. "Ma'am?" Dave called out, his voice calm, professional, and booming with authority. "This is Captain Dave Miller of the City Fire Department. We've responded to a report of a vehicle illegally obstructing a designated fire lane." He paused for effect. "Your vehicle is blocking direct access to a private residence, which is a violation of Municipal Fire Code 304.2. We need you to move your vehicle immediately," Carol sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is harassment. He called you. This is an abuse of power." Dave's face remained a perfect mask of bureaucratic indifference. "Ma'am, the only thing I see is a fire code violation. I'm not interested in neighborhood squabbles. Now we can call the police department to come write the ticket and have a tow truck dispatched, or you can move it. The tow and impound fees for obstructing a first responder's access are substantial. Your choice." Checkmate. The word substantial hung in the air like a guillotine. Humiliation warred with fury on her face, and humiliation won, with the entire neighborhood now peeking out their windows, watching the spectacle unfold. Carol fumbled in her pajama pocket for her keys. She didn't make eye contact with me. She scurried out of her house, her silk pajamas flapping around her ankles, got into her car, and meekly, silently, moved it into her own driveway. As she slunk back inside, I gave Dave a crisp thumbs up. In response, Mike, the driver, gave 2 short, deafening blasts on the Quint's air horn. "Blah blam!" It echoed through the cul-de-sac like a thunderclap of judgment, a final, triumphant salute. Then, with another hiss of its brakes, the ladder truck rumbled away, leaving behind a profound, beautiful silence. I stood alone in my driveway, the owner of the quietest street in town. The war was not over, but holy hell, that battle had been glorious. My victory lap was short-lived. Just as I was finally turning to go inside, to survey the damage to my forgotten dinner, the familiar strobing of red and blue lights painted the houses across the street. A pair of police cruisers glided to a stop. Of course. Predictably, Carol had escalated. She couldn't win with intimidation, so she'd try to win with victimhood. She was already on her lawn when the officers got out, having swapped the silk pajamas for a bathrobe, a garment she somehow wore with the same air of regal authority. She was giving a truly masterful performance to the first officer, a weary-looking veteran whose name tag read Miller. "He brought a whole fire engine!" she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "A whole engine! He threatened me, officer. I have never been so intimidated in my entire life. It was a targeted act of aggression simply because I am the HOA president and I enforce the rules." The second officer, younger, with the name tag Davis, caught my eye. He had the professionally blank expression of a cop trying very, very hard not to laugh. He ambled over to me, his pace deliberately slow. "Evening," he said, his voice low. "Mind walking me through what happened here, sir?" I leaned against my old pickup, crossing my arms. "Sure, I'm a city firefighter. About an hour ago, I got an all-call for a structure fire with confirmed entrapment 2 blocks from here." I gestured with my thumb back toward Maple Ave. "My driveway was illegally and intentionally blocked by that vehicle over there." I pointed a finger at the white Lexus, now sitting meekly in its proper place. The vehicle's owner, Miss Peterson, refused to move it when I informed her of the emergency, so I responded to the scene on foot. Officer Miller had walked over now, his expression one of profound tiredness. "So you didn't threaten her?" "No, sir," I said calmly. "I informed her of the fire code violation. My captain informed her of the fire code violation. At no point was she threatened. We simply requested, officially, that she move her illegally parked vehicle so it was no longer a public safety hazard and a violation of the municipal code." Carol, overhearing this, stormed over. "He's lying! He's twisting things! He's trying to intimidate me!" Miller turned his tired gaze on her. His patience had clearly evaporated somewhere around the whole fire engine part of her story. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat. "Let's be very clear. Did you or did you not park your car in a way that blocked this man's driveway?" It was only temporary," she stammered. "And did you," Miller pressed on, "refuse to move it after he informed you he was a first responder on his way to an emergency?" Carol drew herself up. "He was rude." That was it. That was the answer that broke the camel's back. Officer Miller sighed, a long, mournful sound that spoke of too many late nights dealing with people like Carol. He shook his head slowly, walked back to his cruiser, and began typing on his console. "Ma'am, your rudeness complaint is noted," he said without looking at her. "However, impeding a first responder is a state-level misdemeanor. It's not a suggestion." A whirring sound came from his car, and he emerged with a freshly printed ticket. He walked over and handed it to Carol. "This summons is for violation of State Statute 245.16, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Impeding emergency personnel. It comes with a mandatory court appearance. The date is at the bottom. I strongly suggest you have a good lawyer. Have a nice night." Carol stared at the piece of paper in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was, for the first time since I'd met her, utterly speechless. The officers got back in their cars. As they pulled away, Officer Davis gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of pure, unadulterated solidarity. I watched Carol slink back into her house, the ticket clutched in her hand like a losing lottery ticket. Round 1, a flawless victory. I finally went inside, the smell of burnt onions confirming my dinner was a casualty of the war. It was a small price to pay. The next morning I was feeling pretty good about things. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping. I had won. Then I checked the mail. There it was. A crisp, cream-colored envelope. Her opening salvo in the next phase of the war. I tore it open. Official notice of violation. Unregistered heavy machinery on Residential Street. Violation. On the evening of August 2nd, a large commercial-grade vehicle, Fire Quint 7, was parked at your behest on a public street, creating a visual nuisance and potential pavement damage. Fine, $100. I actually laughed. It was so petty, so absurd that it was hilarious. She was fining me for the fire truck. This woman's audacity knew no bounds. But the laughter died over the next 2 weeks. It became a war of 1,000 paper cuts. Every other day, a new letter. Violation. Grass height measured at 3.25 inches. Covenant limit, 3.0 inches. Fine, $50. The photo sheet included was taken at ground level, making a blade of grass look like a California redwood. Violation. Visible trash receptacles more than 12 hours prior to designated pickup time. Fine, $75. I'd taken the cans out at 8 p.m. for a 7 a.m. pickup. Apparently, my garbage was too eager. Violation. Faded paint on exterior mailbox post. Fine, $50. My personal favorite was the one about the gargoyle. As a joke, I'd bought a small stone gargoyle and put it on my porch, thinking a little Gothic flair would annoy her. The letter I received was a masterpiece of manufactured outrage. Violation. Installation of a threatening or occult lawn ornament. Fine. $100. There was no rule about this. She just made it up. She cited a clause about maintaining neighborhood charm, arguing that a gargoyle was, by definition, charmless. My amusement curdled into a cold, simmering anger. This wasn't about rules. This was a siege. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign of harassment designed to bleed me dry with fines and annoy me into submission. She thought she could make my life so miserable that I would eventually give up and sell my house, my sanctuary. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday. Another cream envelope, but this one was thicker, heavier. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, which felt a little too on the nose. It was a formal notice of intent to place a lien on my property. My unpaid fines, the gargoyle, the ambitious grass, the premature trash, totaled $375. If I didn't pay within 30 days, they would legally attach that debt to my house. I sat at my kitchen table, the collection of violation notices spread out before me like a losing hand of poker. The ladder truck had been a spectacular moment, a moral victory for the ages, but it hadn't solved the problem. It had just made the dragon angrier. I was playing defense, reacting to her attacks, and I was losing. I couldn't win by fighting her on her terms. I had to change the game. I needed a permanent solution, a physical barrier, a declaration of independence written in wood and nails. I needed a fence, a big, beautiful, glorious 6-foot-tall spite fence. My quest began on the internet, scrolling through an endless parade of generic local contractors. Bob's Friendly Fencing, Quality Decks, and more. Their websites were filled with stock photos of smiling families standing behind pristine, white picket fences. That wasn't what I needed. I didn't need a friendly fence builder. I needed a warrior. My internal monologue was working overtime. I need a guy who doesn't just see this as a job. I need an artist, a connoisseur of conflict, a man who looks at a set of HOA bylaws not as a list of rules, but as a challenge. I need the Sun Tzu of cedar planks. Then I found it. The website was simple. No frills. Almost aggressively functional. Gus's Fortifications and Fencing. We build it right. We build it strong. We read the bylaws so you don't have to. The photo gallery wasn't full of happy families. It was full of impressively beefy fences, over-engineered decks, and cleverly designed sheds. The About Us page was just a single, grainy photo of a man with a magnificent, graying beard that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. He was leaning against a ridiculously solid-looking retaining wall, a slight, knowing smirk on his face. This was Gus. I scrolled down to the testimonials. My eyes landed on one that sealed the deal. The HOA told me I couldn't build a storage shed over 100 square feet. Gus came in, read the fine print, and built me a 99.9 square foot, 2-story masterpiece with a loft that they couldn't do a damn thing about. He's not a contractor. He's a lawyer with a nail gun. A legend. I picked up my phone. I had found my weapon. Gus arrived the next afternoon. His diesel truck, a Ram 3500 that looked like it could pull my house off its foundation, rumbled to a stop. He hopped out, a barrel-chested man in his late 50s, whose beard was even more impressive in person. He smelled of sawdust and righteous indignation. He surveyed my house, giving the peeling paint and the half-finished porch a long, appraising look. "Good bones," he grunted. It was the highest compliment he could give. I didn't just ask for a quote. I invited him in, sat him down at my kitchen table, and told him everything. The move-in, the constant stream of violations, the fire, the blocked driveway, the glorious arrival of Quint 7, the cop's ticket, the lien notice. I laid the whole saga at his feet. He listened intently, stroking his magnificent beard. As I finished the story with the notice of intent to lien, a slow smile spread across his face. He slapped his knee with a hand the size of a catcher's mitt and let out a booming laugh that shook the dust from my light fixtures. "Son," he roared, his eyes twinkling, "you are my kind of client, a ladder truck. That's poetry right there. That's art." "Thanks," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "But the art didn't stop the war. Now she's coming after my house. I want a privacy fence. The biggest, strongest, most legally airtight fence money can buy." Gus leaned forward, his smile turning into a conspiratorial grin. "Airtight is my middle name. Give me a copy of your covenants. Let's go to war." I handed him the thick booklet of HOA rules, the one Carol had given me like a holy text on my first day. Gus put on a pair of reading glasses that seemed comically small on his rugged face, and he transformed from a contractor into a Talmudic scholar of suburban legalese. He spread the bylaws out on the table, his thick finger tracing the lines of text. "Okay, here we go," he muttered. "Section 8, fencing. Aha. Fence may not exceed 6 feet in height from the highest grade of the property. Standard stuff. But look what it doesn't say." He tapped the page. "Doesn't specify the material beyond natural wood tones. Doesn't specify the thickness of the posts. Doesn't say a thing about how deep the footings have to be." He flipped a page. "Architectural standards. Plans for all exterior modifications must be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee." Okay, fine. We'll give them plans so detailed, so precise, their eyes will bleed. We'll drown them in paperwork. We spent the next hour devising the ultimate spite fence. It wouldn't just be a fence. It would be a monument. A 6-foot-tall, board-on-board cedar privacy fence. The board-on-board design meant there were 0 visible gaps from any angle. It would be constructed with massive 6x6-inch posts, not the standard 4x4S, each one set a full 3 feet deep in high-strength concrete. It would be less of a fence and more of a wooden fortress wall. "We'll pull the city permits first thing tomorrow," Gus declared, rubbing his hands together with glee. "Then we submit the plans to your HOA. Every I dotted, every T crossed, every city code cited. She'll look for a reason to deny it, but she won't find one. The bylaws say they have to approve any plan that meets the written criteria." "What if she just denies it anyway?" I asked. "She can try," Gus chuckled. "But if she denies a plan that's in full compliance, that's when you get a lawyer. And that's a lawsuit she can't win. Trust me, she'll approve it. And the second we get that approval, my crew starts. We'll have this monument to freedom built in 3 days. And if she tries to stop the work in progress?" I asked, imagining Carol throwing herself in front of a post-hole digger. Gus patted the thick folder of paperwork he'd already started to assemble. "That's what the city permits, and the HOA approval letter are for. She calls the cops, I show them the paperwork, they leave. She calls a city inspector, I'll have him shaking my hand for a job well done. Once we have that approval, she can't touch us." We stood up and shook hands. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a pact, an alliance. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was the patron of a grand artistic endeavor, and Gus was my Michelangelo, preparing to paint a masterpiece on the canvas of my property line. The first part of Gus's prophecy came true with agonizing slowness. With his guidance, I submitted a 12-page fencing proposal to the Architectural Review Committee, which consisted of Carol and 2 of her known cronies, Sharon and Bob. The packet was a work of art. It included surveyor's plots marking the exact fence line, city permit application numbers, detailed schematics for the post footings, material spec sheets for the cedar and the concrete, and even a professionally rendered 3D image of what the completed fence would look like. It was overwhelming, a preemptive strike of bureaucratic competence. Then, the waiting began. The HOA bylaws stated that the committee had exactly 30 days to review and respond to a proposal. If they failed to respond within that time frame, the proposal was automatically approved. For 29 days, there was nothing but maddening silence. I checked my email a dozen times a day. Every time I saw a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox, my heart leaped into my throat. I reread the bylaws every night, convinced I'd missed some tiny loophole she could exploit. I was on edge, a nervous wreck. On the 30th day, I stared at the clock on my computer, watching the minutes tick by. 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 11:30. Nothing. My hopes began to soar. At 11:58 p.m., just as I was ready to declare victory, my email pinged. It was from Carol. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open, bracing for a rejection notice full of legalese. But the email contained only a single, clipped sentence, dripping with impotent rage and defeat. The plans are approved as submitted. She couldn't find a single reason to deny it. She had waited until the last possible second, hoping to torture me. But in the end, she had to surrender. I forwarded the email to Gus with a simple subject line, "Green light." His reply came back in less than a minute. "See you at 0700. At 7 a.m. sharp the next morning, my quiet cul-de-sac was transformed into a military staging ground. Gus's crew descended. It was a symphony of professional efficiency. A flatbed truck arrived, depositing a mountain of fragrant cedar planks in my driveway. Another truck unloaded a gas-powered auger that looked like it could drill to the center of the earth. Before the coffee in my mug was even cool, the auger roared to life, biting into the lawn along my property line with deafening power. It took less than 5 minutes for Carol to appear. She emerged onto her porch in her bathrobe, a mug of coffee clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her face, when she saw the scale of the operation, was a thundercloud. She marched across her lawn, her slippers damp with dew, and confronted Gus. "What is the meaning of this?" she screeched over the noise of the auger. "You cannot start this kind of work this early. It's a disturbance." Gus, who was squinting at a surveyor's line, didn't even look up. "City ordinance says construction can start at 7 a.m., he yelled back calmly. "We're in full compliance. Morning, ma'am." "You're tearing up the lawn. You're on my property," she insisted. "Nope," Gus said, finally glancing at her. "Got a surveyor's report right here." He tapped a clipboard on a nearby sawhorse. "The stakes are 6 inches inside your neighbor's property line, just to be polite. It's all in the plans you approved yesterday." He gave her a sunny, unconcerned smile. Carol's face went from angry to blotchy red. She was flustered, outmaneuvered. She sputtered for a moment, then spun on her heel and retreated to her lawn, where she immediately got on her phone. 30 minutes later, just as Gus had predicted, a white pickup truck with the city logo on the side pulled up. A bored-looking city inspector got out. Carol pointed him dramatically toward the worksite, a smug, triumphant look on her face. This was her checkmate. Gus saw the inspector and grinned. He walked over and greeted him like an old friend. "Morning, Bill. Knew I'd be seeing you today?" "Got a call about some unpermitted work, Gus," the inspector said, though he didn't sound very concerned. "Permits are right here," Gus said, handing him the clipboard. "Plans, surveyor's report, the HOA approval letter, everything you need." Bill the inspector spent a few minutes looking everything over. He walked the property line, peered into a freshly drilled post hole, and kicked a stack of lumber. He nodded. "Looks good, Gus," he said loudly enough for Carol to hear. "Way over code, as usual. Call me when it's done for the final." "You know it, Bill. Only way I know how to build," Gus said with a handshake. The inspector got in his truck and drove away. Carol was left standing alone on her perfect lawn, her mouth agape. She had fired her biggest cannon, and it had bounced harmlessly off Gus's shield of bureaucratic perfection. I watched the entire exchange from my kitchen window, a mug of coffee in my own hand. It was beautiful. It was like watching a National Geographic documentary. Here we see the wily old badger, with his superior knowledge of the terrain, easily outsmarting the prissy territorial fox. I honestly felt like I could have sold tickets. By the end of the day, all the posts were in. Not flimsy 4x4S, but massive 6x6 timbers, set 3 feet deep in dark, wet concrete. They stood in a perfectly straight line, a series of monolithic sentinels guarding the border of my kingdom. A line had been drawn, not in the sand, but in concrete and wood. The next 2 days were a blur of construction. Gus's crew worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing to watch. The solid wall of cedar rose from the ground, plank by fragrant plank. The board-on-board design was even more effective than I'd imagined. It was a solid, impenetrable curtain of wood. From my backyard, Carol's house, her windows, her judgmental gaze, it all just vanished. As the wall went up, something else amazing happened. The neighborhood dynamic began to shift. The Millers, the elderly couple who lived on the other side of me and had always seemed terrified of Carol, brought Gus's crew a large pitcher of ice-cold lemonade. Mr. Miller caught my eye and gave me a discreet but enthusiastic thumbs up. Later, a younger couple I recognized from down the street was walking their dog. The husband leaned in as they passed my driveway. "Dude," he whispered, a huge grin on his face, "that fence is epic. We are so doing this next year." People were starting to see what I saw. Carol wasn't a leader preserving community standards. She was a bully who had finally run into someone who wouldn't back down. The Great Wall of Jack was becoming a symbol of liberation. Carol didn't give up, of course. She spent hours taking photos from every conceivable angle, probably building a new dossier for her lawyer. She would stand near the property line and make loud, passive-aggressive comments about that hideous monstrosity and the catastrophic devaluation of property values. Gus's crew, to their immense credit, completely ignored her, cranking up the classic rock on their job site radio every time she appeared. I spent most of the 2 days out there with them. I wasn't a pro, but I could haul lumber, clean up scraps, and keep a steady supply of coffee and donuts flowing. Gus and I developed a real camaraderie, a bond forged in the fires of suburban warfare. "You know," he said to me on the afternoon of the second day, as we admired a long, perfect stretch of fence, "we do decks, too. A nice second-story deck would give you a real fine view from up there, right over this fence." He gave me a huge wink. "Don't tempt me, Gus," I laughed. "Let's win this war before we start planning the next one." Late on the afternoon of the third day, the final cedar plank was screwed into place. The crew packed up their tools, cleaned the site until it was spotless, and loaded up their trucks. Gus gave the fence a final, paternal pat. It was done. It was magnificent. A 6-foot-tall, perfectly straight, beautifully constructed declaration of my independence. That evening, for the first time since I'd moved in, I stood in my own backyard and felt a sense of complete and total privacy. The world outside, with its judgmental eyes and petty tyrants, was gone. The only sound was the gentle breeze and the chirping of crickets. The silence was golden, and it smelled like fresh-cut cedar. I cracked open a cold beer, leaned against one of the sturdy 6x6 posts, and savored the profound peace. It was a perfect moment. And then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the official Oakwood Preserve neighborhood app. Carol had called an emergency HOA meeting for the following night. The agenda had only one item. Agenda item #1. Review and discussion of a non-compliant structure erected at Lot 72, my house, under Covenant Section 9.4b. My blood ran cold. I scrambled inside, grabbing the thick book of bylaws. My hands trembled as I flipped to the back. Section 9.4b. It was a short, vaguely worded catch-all clause. Compounds, all structures, modifications, and landscaping must maintain the harmonious and aesthetically pleasing character of the community as determined by the board. I read it again. Harmonious and aesthetically pleasing. It wasn't an objective rule about height or materials. It was completely subjective. It meant whatever Carol and her cronies decided it meant. She had been outplayed on the rules, so now she was coming after me on the basis of taste. This was her silver bullet. She was going to put my fence on trial for being ugly. My panic was immediate. I grabbed my phone and called the only man I knew who could help. "Gus," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. "She's trying to get me on aesthetics. Harmonious aesthetic. What the hell does that even mean?" Gus chuckled on the other end of the line, a calm, rumbling sound. "It means you're winning," he said. "That's the desperate, last-ditch shot of a tyrant who's out of ammo. It's a subjective clause, which means it comes down to a vote." "A vote? She controls the board. It'll be me against her and her two stooges." "Right now, yeah," Gus said. "But it's an open meeting, right? Any homeowner can attend and speak." "Yeah, but no one ever goes. It's always just her and her little club." "Well," Gus said, his voice taking on a familiar, strategic tone, "I think it's time to change that. It's time to rally the troops. Remember that young couple who loved your fence? Remember the old folks who brought my boys lemonade? This isn't just your fight anymore, son. You've become a symbol. Now you need to become a politician." He laid out the plan. I was to spend the next 24 hours not worrying, but preparing. I printed out a dozen copies of the HOA-approved plans. I took beautiful, well-lit photos of the completed fence, making it look like something out of a home and garden magazine. And then, most importantly, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went campaigning. I knocked on the Miller's door first. They invited me in for tea, and I laid out the situation, showing them the meeting notice and the harmony clause. "Oh, that woman," Mrs. Miller said, shaking her head. "She made us tear out our prize-winning rose bushes 2 years ago, said their color was too garish." "We'll be there, Jack," Mr. Miller said, his voice firm. "It's about time someone stood up to her." My next stop was the young couple, Mark and Sarah. They listened to my story with growing indignation. "Are you kidding me?" Mark said. "That fence is the best thing to happen to this neighborhood in years. It proves we don't all have to live in identical beige boxes. We're there. Front row." By the time the sun set, I had spoken to 5 other households. 5 households who all had their own stories of Carol's petty tyranny. The man she fined for washing his car on a Sunday. The woman she scolded for having a wind chime that was excessively melodic. They were all fed up, and they were all coming to the meeting. I walked into the sterile, soulless community clubhouse the next night, feeling less like a defendant and more like a general leading an army. Carol, Sharon, and Bob were seated at a folding table at the front of the room. When Carol saw me walk in, followed by the Millers, followed by Mark and Sarah, followed by a dozen other residents, her smug expression faltered. Her eyes widened in shock. This was supposed to be a quick, clean execution, not a public hearing. The room was more crowded than it had been in years. She banged a small gavel, her voice tight with tension. "This emergency meeting of the Oakwood Preserve HOA is now in session." She launched into her attack. It was a masterful performance, full of crocodile tears and wounded pride. She spoke of community, of shared values, of protecting our investments. She called my fence a monstrous, unneighborly wall that had shattered the harmonious sightlines of our peaceful cul-de-sac. "Therefore," she concluded, her voice ringing with false authority, "I move that the board declare the structure at Lot 72 to be non-compliant with Covenant Section 9.4b, and that the owner be required to remove it at his own expense within 30 days. Sharon and Bob nodded along like bobbleheads. My stomach twisted into a knot. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my hands clutching a folder full of my prepared documents. My heart was pounding, but my voice, when it came out, was steady. "Good evening," I said, addressing the room, not just the board. "Carol, you talk about harmony. Let's talk about what's harmonious." I looked around at my neighbors. Is it harmonious to intentionally block a firefighter's driveway when he's on his way to save a neighbor's life? A murmur went through the room. Is it harmonious to issue thousands of dollars in frivolous fines to a new homeowner who is actively trying to improve his property and, by extension, all of our property values? The murmuring grew louder. "My fence," I continued, placing the approved plans on the table, "was approved by this very committee. It meets every single objective rule in our covenants. It was built to city code by a licensed and respected professional. It is a legal, permitted structure." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I turned to the projector I had asked the clubhouse manager to set up. I clicked a button on my laptop. An image flashed onto the screen behind Carol's head. It was a clear, high-resolution photo I had taken from my second-story window that afternoon. It was a picture of Carol's own backyard, specifically her shed. "Speaking of harmony and rules," I said, my voice cold and clear, "I'd like to draw your attention to Covenant Section 7.1c. It states that all detached storage sheds must be under 50 square feet and be of a color that matches the primary residence." "Carol, your shed," I pointed at the baby blue structure on the screen, "is, by my measurement, over 70 square feet. And I don't believe your house is baby blue. I can't seem to find the approved plans for this structure in the public HOA records. Has the board approved this?" An audible gasp swept through the room. Carol spun around, saw the picture, and her face turned a shade of crimson I had only ever seen in the heart of a grease fire. Before she could respond, a familiar, booming voice came from the back of the room. It was Gus. I had invited him as my expert witness. He stood up, stroking his beard. "I can shed some light on that," he said, and a few people tittered at the pun. "I took the liberty of checking the permit filings down at the city records office this afternoon, or rather, the lack thereof. That shed was built without a city permit, which is not only a violation of HOA bylaws, but also city law." The dam broke. Mark, the young husband, shot to his feet. "Hold on. Carol, you fined me $50 because my kid's basketball hoop was visible from the street for 2 hours. You're telling me you have an unpermitted, oversized, rule-breaking shed in your own yard?" Mrs. Miller stood up, her voice trembling with long-suppressed anger. "You made us tear out our roses, my husband's prize-winning roses." Suddenly, everyone had a story. The room erupted in a chorus of grievances, a tidal wave of resentment that had been building for years. Carol's two cronies, Sharon and Bob, looked terrified, shrinking in their seats as they realized they were on the wrong side of history. Carol banged her gavel weakly. "Order! This is not the topic of—" "I believe it is," Mr. Miller said, his voice quiet but firm. He stood up, and the room fell silent. "The topic is harmony, and it seems the greatest source of disharmony in this community is a president who rules like a dictator, holding us all to standards she herself flagrantly ignores. I call for a vote on the motion." Carol, defeated, had no choice. "All in favor of deeming the fence non-compliant?" 3 hands went up, Carol, Sharon, and Bob. "All opposed?" 22 hands shot into the air, a forest of rebellion. The motion failed spectacularly. But Mr. Miller wasn't done. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to make a new motion," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I move for the immediate removal of Carol Peterson as president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association for failure to uphold the covenants and for conduct unbecoming of a board member." "Seconded!" yelled Mark from the back. The vote was a formality. It was a landslide. Carol sat there, utterly broken as her tin pot kingdom crumbled around her. I watched, not with glee, but with a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. It was over. The war was finally over. A week later, I stood on my brand-new, half-finished deck, a spatula in one hand and a cold beer in the other. The smell of grilling burgers mingled with the lingering scent of cedar. Gus was there, leaning against the railing, sipping his own beer. He'd given me a steep discount on the deck. "A warrior's spoils," he'd called it. "Heard the new board voted to officially forgive all your outstanding fines," Gus said, taking a sip. "Yep," I said, flipping a burger. "They also voted to fire Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, and are doing a full top-to-bottom review of the bylaws. They asked me if I wanted to be on the new Architectural Review Committee." "What'd you say?" I politely but firmly declined. I laughed. "My days as a revolutionary are over." Gus chuckled. "Wise man, never be the king. It's much more fun being the guy who builds his own castle." We both looked out over my backyard. My beautiful, private, peaceful backyard. Beyond the fence, a professional sign was being hammered into Carol's perfect lawn. A big red and white, "For Sale" sign. A quiet part of me felt a pang of something, not quite pity, but a recognition of the totality of her defeat. I hadn't set out to ruin her life or drive her from her home. I had just wanted to be left alone. The fence wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of defense. It was the physical manifestation of the word no. Mark and Sarah walked by on the sidewalk on the other side of the fence. We couldn't see them, but we heard them. "Smells great, Jack," Mark yelled over. "Deck's looking awesome. We're having Gus do our fence next month." I smiled, a real relaxed smile. I looked at my house, its new fence standing like a silent, sturdy guardian. The beige had been defeated. The chaos was gone. I took a bite of my burger. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I raised my beer in a toast to Gus, and he raised his in return. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across my yard. My kingdom. I was finally, truly home.